They called me the background character in my own family, until the day I walked in with a black envelope and took back everything they built without me. They laughed like it was the best joke of the night, but I was the only one who knew the punchline hadn't landed yet. The laughter rolled off the patio like cheap champagne, loud, careless, and stinging in its sweetness. I sat at the far end of the long outdoor table, where the citronella candles had burned down to tired stubs, and the wine bottles stood half-drained. Strings of Edison bulbs hung above us like sagging halos, casting a warm, nostalgic hue over the Mercer Estate's lakefront veranda. From a distance, it could have been mistaken for a Norman Rockwell painting, but up close it was something more fragile, something cracking under the weight of its own performance. My father, Douglas Mercer, sat at the head of the table in his weathered leather chair, the same one he always insisted be brought out for him, his throne, as Brandon used to joke. Tonight it looked more like a relic, the armrest scuffed and one side slightly dipped where years of entitlement had worn it down. I wondered if anyone else noticed. I doubted it. He raised his glass again, the cuff of his tailored white shirt catching the light just enough to remind everyone what kind of man he was. Controlled, crisp, calculated. "And of course," he said with a chuckle, "we can't forget about Sloane, what did Ryan call it? Ah, yes, the family's very own background character." More laughter. Even the cousins, who barely knew me beyond holiday gatherings, laughed. Brandon actually slapped the table, as if this were high comedy. "Come on, Dad," Ryan added between gulps of beer. "She's like the loading screen of the family, always there, but nobody really pays attention to it." I smiled, not because it was funny, not because it hurt, but because I was done bleeding for a seat at this table. My fingers curled gently around the stem of my glass. The wine had long since gone warm, but I raised it anyway, offered a polite nod, and sipped. They moved on quickly. Jokes about Brandon's new condo in Miami, some exaggerated tale of Ryan's third home run this season, the Mercer men basking in their curated spotlight. I let their voices blend into the background, like the sound of insects buzzing just beyond the porch light. Constant, familiar, ignorable. The lake stretched quietly behind them, a black mirror reflecting the soft pulse of the string lights. I could see my silhouette in it. Still. Centered. Watching. I glanced at my father, the way his hand gripped the base of his glass like it was a gavel. He leaned back in that old leather chair, the kind that creaked when power shifted too far in one direction. It creaked now, just faintly. His eyes didn't meet mine once. That used to shatter me. Now it amused me. They thought I was here for them. That after years of distance, I had returned to grovel for scraps of attention, some sliver of acknowledgement. They were wrong. I wasn't here to be seen. I was here to end the scene. Under the table, in the lining of my coat, rested an envelope. Heavy, thick, wrapped in matte black and sealed with wax. It wasn't dramatic. It was deliberate. Like every choice I had made since the day I stopped asking for permission to matter. Let them laugh. Let them toast each other's mediocrity as if it were legacy. I could wait a little longer. After all, the punchline always hits harder when no one sees it coming. Even as a child, I knew, there was a pecking order in that house, and I wasn't even a bird. In the family photos lining the hallway of the Mercer estate, you can track the imbalance in posture, in placement. Brandon always in the middle, Ryan laughing on the side, and me, if I made the frame at all, usually a step behind, a foot cut off, face blurred by bad lighting or bad timing. The worst part? No one ever noticed, or if they did, they never said a word. The house was orderly, pristine, like a showroom version of a family. White walls, polished hardwood floors, matching beige furniture, nothing out of place. But beneath the symmetry, there were tears. Brandon, the eldest, was the prototype. Tall, magnetic, full of the kind of charm that turned every mistake into a story. Ryan, the youngest, was the prodigy on the field. Golden boy, fast feet, fast mouth. The Mercer pride. And me? I was just there. I learned early that approval in our house had a currency. It came in the form of claps on the back, oversized steaks on the grill, tickets to baseball games, and Sunday fishing trips. But that currency was never extended to me. My father didn't yell. He didn't have to. He managed to make me feel small with a single raised eyebrow or a perfectly timed silence. When Brandon passed his driver's test on the second try, Dad beamed like he'd won a medal. When I got a perfect score on the state math exam, he glanced at the paper and said, "You must have had a good teacher." I remember the summer Ryan's team won regionals. The whole backyard turned into a celebration. Balloons tied to the porch rail, steaks sizzling on the grill, Dad in his old college hoodie, flipping burgers like it was the 4th of July. Smoke and laughter filled the air like some kind of nostalgic drug. I stood in the doorway, holding a sketch pad against my chest like it was armor. No one asked where I'd been. No one noticed I was even there. Later that night, while they laughed over burnt marshmallows and stories about who tackled who harder, I sat alone in my room, sketching the moon through my window. I drew it as a quiet, watchful eye, something distant, never blinking, never seen. I don't know why, but that image stuck with me. Maybe because that's how I felt back then. A presence, not a participant. My room was the only place that felt mine. The walls were a pale blue, the carpet a little worn near the desk. I had a corkboard filled with awards and ribbons, things I earned without fanfare. At one point, I taped one of my essays to the fridge, hoping Dad might read it. He moved it to make space for Ryan's team photo. Said nothing. The cruelest part of favoritism isn't the attention they get. It's the silence you receive. The way it seeps into your skin and convinces you you're made of something less. That you were born to be a placeholder, a shadow, a pause between their sentences. But even then, even in the stillness of that forgotten space, something inside me refused to die. It wasn't hope. Hope is too soft, too easily shattered. What I carried was sharper. It was observation, calculation. The knowledge that I saw everything, remembered everything, and that someday they'd be forced to see me too. They just didn't know it yet. My first heartbreak didn't come from love. It came from a glitter-covered Father's Day card. I was 12. That awkward age when your heart still believes in magic, even if your eyes are starting to see the cracks. I'd spent the entire weekend holed up in my room, elbows deep in markers and construction paper, carefully choosing each sticker like it held the power to prove I mattered. The card was thick, handmade, dusted in silver glitter that still clung to my fingertips hours later. Inside, I'd written a poem, 4 stanzas, rhymed sincere. It ended with, "I may not be loud or strong or tall, but I hope you see me after all." I practiced how I'd give it to him. Rehearsed the handoff in the mirror, imagined the way his face would light up, how he'd read it aloud and smile, not that polite, tight-lipped smile he reserved for PTA meetings or tax season, but the real one. The smile he gave Ryan when he hit a home run, the one Brandon got for just walking into a room. Father's Day dinner was meatloaf and mashed potatoes. Ryan was still in his jersey from that morning's game, grass stains on his knees, sweat drying in his hair. Dad had been shouting from the sidelines, calling him Mercer's Rocket. I sat 2 seats away, the card tucked under my thigh, heart pounding like I was about to take a test I hadn't studied for. After we cleared the plates, I followed him into the living room, where he was already sinking into his recliner, remote in one hand, cold beer in the other. The TV flickered with a baseball game, casting the room in an icy blue hue. I stepped in front of him, hesitated, then held out the card like an offering. "Happy Father's Day," I said, soft but hopeful. He took it without looking at me, flipped it open with one hand, scanned it in silence. A low, almost involuntary "thanks" slipped from his mouth, as if he were commenting on the weather. Then he set it on the coffee table, already forgotten, and turned his gaze back to the game. 5 minutes later, Ryan came barreling in, holding out a glossy gift bag from the drugstore. "Got you something," he said, proud as a lion. Dad pulled out the mug, bold red letters on white ceramic, Number 1, Dad. The room erupted in laughter. Ryan beamed. Dad let out a full-bodied laugh, then pulled him into a one-armed hug that lasted longer than any hug I could remember. I stood off to the side, invisible again. The card I made was still on the table, glitter catching the light in a way that felt mocking now. My fingers itched to take it back. I didn't. I just stared at it, the way you stare at something precious that you suddenly realize no one else sees as valuable. I don't remember what was on TV that night, but I remember the sound of that ceramic mug clinking against the table as Dad set it down beside my card. One was shiny, store-bought, forgettable. The other was me. And for the first time, I felt what it was like to want to disappear from a room I had tried so hard to be a part of. I walked upstairs without saying goodnight. In my room, I scraped glitter off my hands like it was something shameful. The poem stayed in my notebook after that. I never wrote him another. For once, I had the spotlight, and somehow it made me feel more invisible. The lights were bright, almost too bright, bouncing off the glass walls of the event space in downtown Seattle. The hum of conversation, the subtle clinks of champagne flutes, the flashes from cameras. Everything pulsed like a heartbeat just beneath the surface of my skin. They were here for me, for something I'd built from nothing but exhaustion, caffeine, and the raw, aching desire to matter. The platform demo had gone flawlessly. Questions from investors had turned into praise. My inbox was already flooding with interview requests from local tech blogs before I even stepped off the stage. And for a few hours, I let myself believe it. That maybe this was it. The moment. My moment. I even wore red. Not because I needed to stand out, but because I wanted to feel alive in the middle of it all. Vivid, visible. I remember catching my reflection in the chrome elevator as I left that night, smiling to myself in a way that felt unfamiliar. Like I was borrowing joy from a version of me that hadn't learned better yet. The next night, we had dinner at the house. It was one of those impromptu family nights my mother arranged when she sensed the widening cracks but didn't know how to seal them. The dining room was exactly as I remembered. Too much beige, too much symmetry. Ryan was already halfway through a beer, Brandon was scrolling through something on his phone, and Dad, of course, was seated at the head of the table, posture perfect, like he'd just walked out of a campaign photo. We passed plates and feigned interest in each other's lives. When the conversation circled to "What's new?" I waited for the beat. The 1 second of quiet where maybe, just maybe, someone would ask me about the launch. It didn't come, so I spoke up. "I had my startup launch last night," I said, careful, steady. "We had some press coverage. A few investors came on board." "That's nice," Dad said, before I could finish, not even looking up from his plate. "Brandon, you said your VC meeting got pushed. What happened there?" The shift was seamless, like flipping a page in a script. 1 second I was speaking, the next I was background noise. Forks clinked against porcelain. My mother gave me a soft smile that said, "Sorry," in a way she'd never say aloud. Brandon launched into a story about a venture partner who didn't get his vision, and everyone leaned in like it was gospel. I sat back, hands in my lap, voice tucked behind my teeth. The same voice that had held a room full of strangers the night before. The same voice that had crafted every pitch, every call, every late-night rewrite that got me to where I was. But here, it meant nothing. I stared at my father as he laughed at something Ryan said. His eyes never met mine, not once. And that was the moment. Not the startup, not the launch, not the applause. The moment I realized no amount of spotlight could reach the blind. I excused myself early that night, walked outside into the cool evening air. The lights from the house glowed warm behind me, but the warmth didn't reach. I stood in the driveway for a long time, keys in hand, engine off. Just breathing. I had built something brilliant, and it still wasn't enough. But maybe I was aiming too low. Maybe I wasn't meant to be seen. Maybe I was meant to make them look up. I stopped knocking on the door that was never going to open. No dramatic send-off. No final blowout argument. Just a cardboard box in the back seat of my car and a lease with my new name signed in blue ink. I didn't leave a note. I didn't announce I was going. I just disappeared. The apartment was small, studio layout, low ceilings, yellowed tile in the bathroom, but it was mine. No footsteps overhead, no voices bleeding through the walls, no echoes of comparison living in the next room. Just quiet. Blessed, aching quiet. The living room doubled as my office. One corner was taken up by a folding table I'd repurposed into a desk. A corkboard hung above it, blank when I moved in but quickly filled with post-it notes. Ideas scribbled at 2 a.m., deadlines, launch goals, reminders to breathe. The desk lamp flickered sometimes. I never fixed it. It reminded me that nothing, not even electricity, is promised. I changed my last name a week after moving in. Mercer had never felt like mine. It was something I wore like a borrowed coat, too heavy, too tight in the shoulders. So I filed the paperwork, paid the fee, and stepped out from under the shadow of someone else's legacy. The email that confirmed it came at 4:42 in the morning. I read it 3 times in the blue glow of my screen, alone in the stillness, ramen half-eaten beside my keyboard. Then I deleted my Facebook. Every tagged photo, every Mercer Christmas post, every hollow happy birthday from cousins who didn't know what color my eyes were. Gone. Holiday invites came, but I let them die unread. The texts were sporadic at first. "Are you okay? Coming for Thanksgiving? Dad says you're being dramatic." Eventually, they stopped. Silence became our new tradition. But the startup didn't care if I was invisible. The startup only cared that I showed up. And I did. Every damn day. While my brothers posted gym selfies and fish they barely caught, I was writing code, fixing bugs, negotiating contracts I had no business handling. I learned how to write copy, pitch investors, file taxes. There were nights the heater didn't work, and I typed in gloves. Mornings, I woke up with a keyboard imprint on my cheek. I lived on caffeine and cold cereal. Some nights, dinner was a pack of saltines and whatever was left of the French press. The only light in the apartment came from my laptop, glowing against white walls that still smelled faintly of paint and old air. And yet I felt more alive there than I ever did at that long table in the Mercer dining room. I didn't miss them. Not really. What I missed was the idea of them, the fantasy that maybe, if I tried just right, I'd be enough. But fantasy is for children. And I wasn't a child anymore. I was building something, not just a company, but a version of myself that no longer needed permission to exist. No longer waited for applause. The world they shut me out of, I no longer wanted in. And the world I was creating? They wouldn't be able to ignore it for long. Buried on page 7 of the deal was a name I hadn't heard in years, Anderson Tech. I was sitting at the long end of a conference table in a glass-walled office on the 23rd floor, rain streaking the windows like old tears. Across from me sat a man in a slate-gray suit who spoke in phrases like agile valuation and diversified leverage. I'd stopped really listening by page 5. It wasn't until the associate slid the preliminary acquisition packet in front of me, glossy, thick, perfumed with too much cologne from the last person who touched it, that my eyes caught the header, Target Entity, Anderson Technology Group, Inc. My pulse skipped. It wasn't even highlighted, just another line item nestled between financial disclosures and licensing rights. But the moment I read it, time slowed. The rain against the glass dulled. The fluorescent lights above buzzed faintly, distant. Everything else fell away. Anderson Tech. The company where Douglas Mercer had sat in a corner office for over a decade, the place he called his second home, the one space where, unlike the Mercer estate, he held the power, the voice, the reverence. I remember the day he got that promotion, how he made Brandon shake his hand like a junior associate, how Mom bought a cake that said, "To the top." I was 16. I wasn't even invited to the dinner. And now, it was on my desk. The associate kept talking, flipping pages, pointing out assets and legal language like it all meant the same thing. He didn't notice my silence. Or maybe he did and mistook it for business contemplation. But inside, something shifted. I reached out, let my fingertips skim the edge of the packet. The paper was thick, smooth, expensive. I traced the company name slowly, like reading a name on a gravestone. And then, without thinking, I touched the screen of my laptop, where the deal summary glowed against the backdrop of my desktop. The name shimmered there, digital and real. Anderson Tech. I hadn't seen it written out since my father's business cards, the ones he kept stacked like little trophies in his desk drawer, always Douglas Mercer Executive Director. Never Dad. I leaned back in my chair, let out a slow breath, and smiled. It wasn't gloating. It was recognition. This was the moment the universe stopped whispering and started answering. "Shall we proceed?" the associate asked, his tone clipped. I didn't hesitate. "Absolutely," I said, voice even. "Let's draft the paperwork." That night, back at the apartment, I opened the finalized agreement on my laptop, page after page of legal language and fine print. But I didn't need to read it all. I skipped to the end, to the line where the buyer signs. The cursor blinked, waiting. I picked up the black pen I always kept beside the keyboard. Not the stylus I used for mock-ups, not the clicky gel pen from the grocery store. This one was matte black, heavy, engraved with my initials, my new initials. A gift I gave myself when I legally changed my name. No more Mercer, no more asking. I signed with slow precision. Sloan Marin. The last letter curled with finality, a quiet flourish. I stared at the signature for a long time. Then I leaned back in my chair, let the weight of what I had just done settle in the stillness around me. My father once told me, "Business is about timing." He was right. He just never imagined I'd be the one keeping the clock. It looked like a gift. It was a declaration of war. The car dealership smelled like leather and soft triumph. Rows of polished machines lined the showroom floor, glinting under cool, recessed lighting like waiting predators. I didn't linger. I walked straight to the back, to the one parked beneath a halo of overhead light. Black, sleek, the kind of car that whispered rather than roared. A quiet threat on 4 wheels. The salesman, a man named Troy of all names, talked too much. I tuned out everything after, fully loaded limited edition. I already knew what I was buying. Not a vehicle, a symbol. Something that would sit in the Mercer driveway like a black hole, pulling attention whether they wanted to give it or not. I paid in full, under the name on my license, Sloan Marin. Back at the apartment, I cleared the desk, pushed aside stacks of mock-ups and legal docs, and pulled out the envelope. It was heavy. Matte black, with a thin gold trim along the edges that caught the light just right. Subtle, but unmistakably deliberate. I had chosen it like a weapon, elegant, exact, merciless. Inside was the transfer document. 1 page, clean, final. Ownership of Anderson Technology Group and its subsidiaries, reassigned through acquisition and silent asset rollover to Sloan Marin Holdings LLC. Effective immediately. No fireworks, no legalese padding, just the facts. I folded the paper along the creases until it slid into the envelope with a soft finality. Then I sealed it with a round wax stamp, gold over black, pressed so cleanly that I half smiled at the sharpness of it. There was a knock at the window, just the wind, tapping against the cracked frame like a reminder. I stood, walked over, and pushed it open. The night air rushed in, cold, dry, restless. It curled around the edges of my shirt and lifted a few post-it notes from the corkboard. I let them flutter to the floor. Below, on the street, the new car sat waiting. Its surface absorbed the streetlights, no reflections, no glow, just silence. I placed the envelope in a small velvet box, lined it with black satin, no ribbons, no card, nothing soft. Then I lowered it gently into the trunk of the car, like placing a crown in a coffin. It would sit there for 3 more nights, untouched, waiting. I didn't rush the moment. Timing was part of the blade. This wasn't revenge served cold. It was precision-aged, measured, held until the temperature was just right. Each day I watched the forecast, not the weather, the family group chat. Messages popped up. Sunday dinner confirmed. Father's Day, full house. Brandon's bringing the bourbon. Dad's favorite, of course. I didn't respond, just scrolled, deleted, scrolled again. On Saturday night, I ironed a black blouse, pressed the sleeves flat, and laid it over the back of the chair like armor. The box was still in the trunk, untouched. But every time I walked past the window and saw that car, black, silent, waiting, I felt it humming. Not from the engine, from the purpose sealed inside. A storm wasn't coming. I was. He toasted to his sons, completely unaware that his kingdom was already gone. The Mercer house hadn't changed. The hedges were still manicured into submission. The porch light still glowed with that sterile, golden warmth that said, "Look at us. We've got it all together." But the driveway had one new detail. A sleek black car, parked deliberately, engine off, body gleaming beneath the soft, overcast light, like it had materialized from smoke. Mine. The surface of the lake behind the house was flat, mirror-like, and just dark enough to reflect the car without distortion, a perfect image, untouched, unshaken, for now. The patio was already full, glasses clinking, someone laughing too loud, Brandon retelling an old story like it still had legs. The scent of grilled steak and overpriced cologne drifted on the breeze. I stood just outside the pool of light, unnoticed, like I'd always been. It was strange how natural that still felt, like muscle memory. Then I stepped forward. My heels clicked against the stone. One by one, heads turned. First Ryan, mid-beer, then Brandon, then Mom, who froze mid-pour of sangria, and finally Douglas Mercer. He squinted at first, the way someone does when trying to place a familiar face in an unfamiliar setting. "Well, look what the cat dragged in," he said, voice coated in that oily charm he reserved for public moments. "You still remember how to get here, huh?" I gave a small nod. "The road hasn't moved." There was a beat of silence, just enough to feel the awkwardness tighten, then laughter, too loud, too rehearsed. Brandon stood to pull out a chair, like he thought it would earn him points for being decent. I took my seat at the far end of the table, the one they used to leave empty out of habit, not hope. Dinner unfolded with all the artificial ease of a staged photo. Dad passed out compliments like medals. Brandon's new real estate project, Ryan's recent hiking trip that somehow involved an endorsement deal. He beamed with every anecdote, refilled his own glass, toasted his boys, his legacy. I said nothing, just watched. Measured the weight of their confidence like someone calculating rainfall before the flood. The box sat in the crook of my arm, black velvet with no tag, no explanation. I waited until the dessert came out, store-bought cheesecake, Dad's favorite, before I stood. "I brought something," I said quietly, loud enough to cut through the buzz but soft enough to draw their ears closer. All eyes turned. I walked the length of the table, each step careful, the night wrapping around me like a storm cloud waiting to break. When I reached him, I placed the box directly in front of him. No words, no flair. Just the truth, gift-wrapped. His hand hovered over the lid like he expected it to bite. In a way it would. He opened it. The sound was small, a soft pop of velvet hinges, but it echoed louder than any toast he'd given that night. The room fell still. Forks paused mid-air. Brandon blinked once, then again. Ryan tilted his head, confused. But my father's expression shifted. First curiosity, then recognition, then that twitch behind his eyes, confusion grappling with fear. He picked up the envelope with 2 fingers, as if it might soil him. The seal caught the light. Black wax, gold ring. His thumb hesitated over the flap, and for the first time in my life, he looked at me. Not past me, not through me. At me. "Open it," I said, calm as the lake behind us. And he did. The Last Supper had begun. They just didn't know which side of the table they were sitting on. He opened the envelope with a smirk. He read it with a tremble. At first, he didn't understand what he was holding. He peeled back the flap like he expected a birthday card or a kitschy mug coupon. Then his eyes skimmed the page, Once. Quick, confident, until they didn't. The second read was slower. His mouth parted slightly, the paper stiff in his grip. I watched the blood drained from his face like water spilling from a cracked glass. The tan in his skin, so carefully maintained, turned ghostly, like the wax seal itself had cursed him. Silence hit the table like a dropped plate. Ryan was the first to move. "What is it?" he asked, already standing. Dad didn't answer. His eyes kept scanning the same sentence, over and over, as if repetition might soften its finality. His hands, once firm and certain, trembled now, faintly, then visibly, the way an old man's might when signing a will he never thought he'd need. Brandon leaned forward. "Dad?" Still nothing, just the faint twitch of his jaw, the sound of paper crackling in his tightening grip. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. Ryan snatched the document from his hands like a child grabbing a forbidden toy. His brow furrowed. "No way. This is fake, right? This has to be fake." "It's not," I said, my voice quiet but resolute. Brandon circled the table to read over Ryan's shoulder. "This says, she owns Anderson Tech?" He looked up at me, disoriented, like I'd shifted the walls around him without warning. "You?" "Through acquisition," I replied calmly. "Full transfer, effective last week." My father finally looked up. His eyes locked on mine, and for the first time in my life, I saw something I'd never seen there before. Not indifference, not disappointment. Fear. It flickered just behind the bravado, barely visible, but I saw it. And I savored it. You don't just buy something like that," he said, voice brittle. "That company, those shares, those were mine." "Were," I said. "Not anymore." "You don't know what you're doing," he said, the old sharpness returning like a reflex. "You think this makes you powerful? This stunt?" I tilted my head, studying him the way I'd studied investors before delivering bad news. "It's not a stunt," I said. "It's succession, just not the way you planned it." Behind me, the scraping of chairs, footsteps, Ryan pacing now, Brandon muttering under his breath, flipping the paper as if a second page might rewrite the first. The air was thick with unraveling, years of assumed permanence dissolving in a matter of seconds. How could you?" My father choked on the question, like it hurt to form the words. I stood slowly, smoothed the front of my blouse. "I asked for your respect," I said. "I earned your indifference, and now I own the one thing you cared about more than any of us." The sound of forks clattering to plates, of Brandon's disbelief, Ryan's denial, my mother's silence, none of it touched me. I turned, and I walked. Behind me, voices rose into chaos. Questions, protests, disbelief breaking like glass against tile. But I didn't stop. I didn't turn around. The weight I'd carried for years was no longer mine. It belonged to them now. The girl they ignored no longer lived here, and the woman I became didn't need their names. The city spread beneath me in lights and motion, a slow drifting constellation of movement and meaning. From the 26th floor, everything looked cleaner, quieter, like the chaos of the world had been flattened into something poetic. My palm rested against the glass, cool and smooth, grounding me in the stillness I had long fought to find. The sun had nearly set, but the office was lit in amber, gold pouring through the windows, brushing across the edges of my hair, my shoulders, the sleeves of my black blouse. I stood in its warmth, not just lit, but claimed by it. I had walked through fire, and now I stood in the glow of what remained. Behind me, the office was hushed. My desk sat near the window, clean but lived in. On it, the final contract still lay open, the transfer ink dry. Next to it, a ceramic mug with no label, plain white, chipped slightly at the rim. Beside the mug, a single photo frame. No family, no smiling faces locked in obligation. Just me. Candid, mid-laugh, caught by a former intern on the day we launched the beta platform. I hadn't meant to keep it, but every time I tried to put it away, I couldn't. It reminded me that joy, real joy, wasn't something anyone handed you. It was something you carved out of silence. The Mercer house was far behind me now. I imagined them still sitting at that long table, paper in hand, trying to rewrite a past they had long ignored. But no amount of shouting would undo what I had written in silence. No amount of disbelief would change the ownership signature stamped across the pages of their legacy. Mine. It wasn't about the company. It never had been. It was about agency. It was about waking up and no longer apologizing for taking up space, for speaking when uninvited, for daring to win without their permission. They would survive. They'd rearrange themselves into something resembling order, dress the wound in pride, spin their version of events until the edges blurred. But none of it mattered anymore. Not to me. I watched the traffic below, the lights glowing red and gold as cars crawled forward in practiced patterns. I had no urge to move, no urgency to explain. This silence, the one that had once choked me, now wrapped around my shoulders like velvet. It no longer demanded anything of me. I was no longer the girl with glitter on her hands waiting to be seen. I was the woman who saw herself clearly, entirely, no legacy passed down, no crown inherited. I built my own. My reflection in the window stared back, steady, calm, undeniable. There was no need to speak, no need to raise my voice. I didn't need to scream to be heard. I just had to stand tall and let the truth speak for itself. Lesson learned. A quiet kind of power. I used to think power came from being chosen. By your family, your father, the people who sit at the head of the table and decide who matters. But I've learned that real power doesn't wait to be handed over. It's claimed. Quietly, steadily, without permission. For years, I mistook invisibility for weakness. I thought silence meant I didn't belong. But in truth, that silence became my sanctuary. It taught me to observe, to build in the shadows, to sharpen my voice without ever needing to raise it. And when the time came, I didn't need a stage or applause. I just needed one page, one signature, one moment of undeniable truth. This isn't a story about revenge for the sake of pain. It's about reclamation, about rewriting a legacy that was never meant to include me. I didn't take back what was mine to hurt them. I took it back so I could finally stop hurting. So here's what I know now. You don't have to scream to be heard. You don't need their validation to rise. Sometimes the most dangerous thing you can be is underestimated. Because while they were looking the other way, I built an empire. And when I walked away from that table, I wasn't broken. I was free. Thank you for staying with me through this journey. If you've ever felt invisible in a room full of people who claim to love you, if you've ever poured yourself into something only to have it dismissed, then I hope this story reminded you, you are not alone. And more importantly, you are not powerless. To those still sitting in the shadows, still building quietly, still waiting for the right moment, keep going. Your silence is not weakness. It's preparation. And when your moment comes, it won't need to shout. It will speak for itself. If this story moved you, helped you see yourself a little clearer, or gave you strength to let go of the approval you never needed, please take a moment to like, share, or leave a comment. I'd love to hear your story too. And don't forget to subscribe for more powerful, true-to-life stories of quiet strength, poetic justice, and voices that refuse to stay silent. Because sometimes the softest voice in the room is the one that rewrites everything.